Picture this. Not a philosopher's peaceful end, but the stark, biological reality of a state execution. The air in the stone cell is thick with the damp smell of earth and sweat. A man lies on a simple cot, his mind perfectly clear, a prisoner in his own body. He tries to speak, to offer one last word of defiance, but his diaphragm is paralyzed. He can't draw a breath. His muscles, once under his command, now fire in chaotic, uncontrollable tremors. A cold dread, far more chilling than the poison in his veins, washes over him as he realizes he is suffocating, wide awake. This wasn't a gentle slide into oblivion. This was a brutal, conscious, and terrifying end. We've been told a beautiful lie about the death of Socrates. Tonight, we uncover the documented, physical truth of his final, horrifying moments. And now please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. That visceral, terrifying image of a man suffocating, wide awake and trapped within his own body is not the story you were told. It's not the story anyone was told. The official history, the one carved into the very foundations of Western thought, paints a picture so serene, so profoundly peaceful, it feels more like a painting than a death. We get this account from Socrates' most devoted student, Plato, in his dialogue, the Phaedo. He describes a scene of quiet dignity. Socrates, surrounded by his weeping friends, isn't afraid. Instead, he's consoling them, engaging in one final brilliant discussion about the immortality of the soul. When the jailer brings the cup of poison hemlock, there is no hesitation. Socrates takes it calmly. Plato writes, without trembling or changing color or expression. He is instructed to simply walk around until his legs feel heavy. And so he does. As he lies down on the cot, he describes the sensation to his friends. A slow, creeping numbness beginning in his feet and moving its way up his body. A gentle coldness. He remains lucid, philosophical, and in complete command of himself until the very end. His last words are not a gasp for air, but a mundane instruction to a friend about repaying a debt. It is the perfect death for a philosopher. The triumph of a brilliant mind over the frailties of the flesh. A noble, controlled exit. But it's a story, and when you place it next to the silent, suffocating horror of a real hemlock poisoning, the two images tear each other apart. One of them has to be a lie. But what if the most famous death in philosophy is actually a cover-up? To understand why they would need to create such a powerful lie, you have to understand the city that killed him. Forget the marble temples gleaming in the sunday. The Athens of 399 BC was a city licking its wounds, a ghost haunted by the memory of its own greatness. They had just lost a catastrophic decades-long war with their rivals, Sparta, but the defeat was only the beginning. The victorious Spartans had torn down the city's defensive walls and installed a brutal puppet regime, the 30 tyrants, who unleashed a reign of terror on their own people. For months, Athens was choked by a bloodbath of executions, property confiscations, and paranoid accusations. By the time democracy was restored, the city was a psychological ruin, scarred and suspicious, seeing enemies in every shadow. And in the center of this storm of fear stood Socrates. He wasn't some beloved, absent-minded professor. To many Athenians, he was the dangerous intellectual force who had mentored the very men who had betrayed them. His most famous students weren't just philosophers. They were figures like Alcibiades, the brilliant traitor who defected to Sparta, and Critias, the bloodthirsty leader of the 30 tyrants. For years, Socrates had questioned their most sacred beliefs, their traditions, their gods. In a stable, confident city, he was an eccentric gadfly. But in this broken, terrified city, his constant questioning felt like an acid, dissolving the last threads of their social fabric. They were looking for a scapegoat, for someone to blame for the nightmare they had endured. And Socrates, with his dangerous ideas and even more dangerous friends, was the perfect target. So when he was dragged into the people's court, it was never going to be a trial about ideas. It was an exorcism. and the vote they took would reveal just how close this terrified city came to letting him go before they condemned him with a vengeance. So the stage for this exorcism is set, not in a dark temple, but in the heart of Athenian democracy, the People's Court. Imagine the scene. This isn't a quiet, wood-paneled courtroom. It's a chaotic, open-air assembly in the bustling agora, the city's central square. The air is hot, dusty, filled with the murmurs and shouts of the crowd, and the jury isn't a panel of 12 impartial experts. It is a massive crowd of 501 male citizens, pulled from the streets by lottery farmers, merchants, potters, soldiers, each holding a simple token to cast their vote. The charges against Socrates are read out, and they are intentionally vague, malleable accusations perfect for a paranoid public. Impiety for not believing in the city's gods, and the far more dangerous charge of corrupting the youth. The prosecution paints him as a menace, a cancer on the soul of Athens. Socrates, in his defense, offers no apologies. He is defiant, sarcastic, and utterly brilliant. Then, the vote is taken. The hundreds of jurors file past two urns, dropping their tokens to decide the philosopher's guilt or innocence. Given the city's thirst for a scapegoat, you'd expect a landslide. But the result that comes back is stunning. This is the first piece of verifiable, documented evidence that the official story conveniently leaves out. The final tally is 280 to 221. Do the math. He is found guilty by a margin of only 60 votes. A swing of just 30 men, 30 farmers, 30 soldiers out of 500, and Socrates would have walked free that day. He wasn't the universally hated figure we've been led to believe. The city was deeply, profoundly divided on him. He was on a knife's edge, a breath away from acquittal, and this is where the real mystery begins. Because in a Greek trial, a guilty verdict wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a second debate, a second vote on the punishment. He had a chance to save himself. But what he did next, the words he spoke to that divided jury, would not only seal his fate, but would turn a narrow conviction into a furious, overwhelming demand for his death. The jury is split. The air in the agora is thick with uncertainty. Socrates stands convicted, but only just. He is a mere 30 votes away from freedom, and now he has one last chance to speak. One last chance to save his own life. The rules of the Athenian court are simple. The prosecution proposes a penalty, the defense proposes a counter-penalty, and the jury must choose between the two. There is no middle ground. The accusers, sensing their victory is fragile, go for the kill. They demand the ultimate punishment, death. Now, all eyes are on Socrates. A plea for mercy, a humble suggestion of exile, even a large fine would almost certainly be enough to sway a jury that was already so divided. But Socrates does not plead. He does not bargain. What he does next is an act of supreme, breathtaking arrogance that will echo through history. He tells the 501 jurors that for his decades of service to the state, for being their philosophical gadfly, he doesn't deserve a punishment at all. He deserves a reward. He proposes that he should be given free meals for life at the Prytaneum, the city's sacred public hall. This was an honor reserved for Olympic champions and war heroes. You can almost feel the shock suck the air out of the agora, replaced by a wave of pure fury. This wasn't a defense. It was a final, magnificent act of defiance. He was mocking the very men who held his life in their hands. The jury files past the urns a second time. But this vote is not close. It is an avalanche of rage. The tally for the death penalty comes back. 360 to 140. Let that sink in. A man who was a handful of votes from walking free is now condemned by an overwhelming majority. 80 jurors who had just voted him innocent now voted for him to die. It was a spectacular act of suicide by jury. He provoked them into killing him, which raises the terrifying question: why? What did he say that turned so many against him so quickly? What did he know that made death preferable to silence? With his fate sealed by his own words, he was no longer a philosopher in a public square. He was a prisoner of the state. destined for a place the official histories never wanted you to see. He provoked them into killing him. And with that final, furious vote, Socrates the philosopher vanished, replaced by Socrates the condemned prisoner. For the next month, he would be held by the state, awaiting the return of a sacred ship from Delos, a delay that postponed all executions. But where was he held? The serene dialogues of Plato describe conversations, not conditions. The official history is silent on the physical reality of his last days. For centuries, the location of the Athenian state prison, the Desmoterion, was lost to history, a ghost in the city's past. But then, in the late 1940s, and with a definitive identification coming only in the 1970s, archaeologists excavating just outside the agora uncovered a stark, public building they called the Poros building. This was no Athenian home. The measurements tell a chilling story. A cold, rectangular structure, 40 meters long by 17 meters wide. There was no central, sunlit courtyard. Instead, a long, grim corridor ran down its spine, with 8 small, cramped rooms branching off it. This wasn't a place for living, this was a cage. And it's inside this newly discovered evidence, this verifiable location of Socrates' final days, that the investigation takes a dark, forensic turn. During the excavation, buried in the dirt, the archaeologists found a small, specific collection of artifacts. 13 tiny clay jars, or phials. They are a rare find. Not the kind of thing you see in a home. Forensic analysis suggests they were used for dispensing carefully measured doses of medicine. Or, in a place like this, for distributing the precise, single, fatal dose of a state-sanctioned poison. For the first time, we had the location. And now, we had what looked like the delivery system. A tangible, physical link between the verdict and the execution. A silent promise of the horror to come. Now, all that was left to identify was the weapon itself. We have the prison. We have the files, the delivery system for the sentence. Now we have the weapon itself. The state poison of Athens was not some exotic, mystical substance. It was an extract from a common plant that grew in the ditches and fields all around the city. Conium maculatum. Poison hemlock, a deceptively delicate-looking weed with clusters of small white flowers. It is one of the most toxic plants in Europe. Through the lens of modern toxicology, we no longer have to guess about its effects. We can map them with chilling precision. The active ingredient is a potent neurotoxin, an alkaloid called conium. And what expert analysis reveals is that it does not cause a gentle numbness. Conium works by attacking the neuromuscular junction, the critical point where your nerves tell your muscles what to do. It systematically severs the connection between your brain and your body. It doesn't kill you by attacking your organs or your mind. It kills you by shutting down your physical self, piece by brutal piece. The fatal dose is terrifyingly small, estimated to be between 150 and 300 milligrams, just a few drops of a carefully prepared solution, easily measured out into one of those 13 clay phials. This is where the beautiful story of Socrates' death begins to truly unravel. The official story, the one Plato gave us, tells of a peaceful, gentle numbness. But the cold, hard science of what conium does to a human body, it tells a very different tale. A tale of chaos, of betrayal by one's own body, that the official history was desperate to erase. The official history was desperate to erase it. Because the science of what hemlock does to a human body doesn't describe a gentle numbness. It describes a sequence of escalating biological horrors. And the first stage is one of absolute indignity. Long before any peaceful numbness, there is often a violent wave of nausea. The body revolts against the toxin with gut-wrenching abdominal cramps and vomiting, a complete and humiliating loss of control that Plato's pristine account conveniently omits. But that is only the beginning. As the conium severs the links between nerve and muscle, the body begins to betray itself. The physical betrayal starts with tremors, then escalates into full-body fasciculations, uncontrollable, chaotic, twitching as his muscles fire in a storm of miscommunication. This isn't a man calmly walking around until his legs feel heavy. This is a man losing all physical command, a prisoner in his own convulsing skin. But even that is not what kills him. The true, final horror, the detail they hid above all else, is the paralysis. It begins in the feet, just as Plato wrote, but it is not a gentle coldness. It's a deadening, a slow, creeping helplessness that climbs its way up the legs into the torso. And then it reaches his chest. It paralyzes his diaphragm. It freezes the intercostal muscles that allow him to draw breath. And here is the most terrifying medical fact of all. His mind remains perfectly, horrifyingly clear until the very end. Can you imagine the terror? Trapped inside a body that is refusing to breathe, wide awake, lucid, screaming for air inside your own mind but unable to make a sound. Suffocating for minutes on end. This wasn't a peaceful drift into oblivion. This was a brutal, conscious, agonizing death. And the fact that we were told a beautiful lie instead isn't an accident. It's the most critical part of the entire story. And that is the most critical part of the entire story. Because the beautiful lie wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. So we must ask the final, crucial question: why? Why invent such an elaborate, beautiful falsehood? Why replace a scene of agonizing biological chaos with one of serene, philosophical calm? The answer begins with a fact that the official history hides in plain sight. A single line buried in Plato's own text. Plato was not there. He explicitly states he was ill and was not present on the day of the execution. The entire account, the serene death that has defined Socrates for 2.5 millennia, is not an eyewitness testimony. It is secondhand. It is a story, crafted by a man who was not in the room. And as Socrates' greatest student, Plato understood he had a choice. He could report the ugly, physical truth, or he could construct a death that served the philosophy. Think about it. Socrates' entire life's work was about the supremacy of the soul over the body, of reason over chaos. How could the father of that idea die in a spasm of uncontrolled convulsions and panicked suffocation? That kind of messy, undignified, purely biological end would have been a catastrophic failure of his entire life's message. It would have proven that in the final moments, the body always wins. So Plato, the storyteller, the philosopher, the legacy builder, made a choice. He didn't write a history. He wrote a foundational myth. The story in the Phaedo isn't a memory. It's the single most successful piece of philosophical propaganda ever written. He took the ugly, inconvenient reality of a state execution and polished it into the perfect martyrdom. It was a calculated decision to sacrifice the truth of the man to immortalize the power of his ideas. And in doing so, he created a blueprint, a model that reveals a far more disturbing truth about who gets to write history and how the powerful can ensure that the dead never tell their own stories. And that is the final, chilling lesson of this investigation. The case of Socrates is more than just a historical true crime story. It's a perfect case study in how the truth is buried. It shows us the pattern. You don't need to destroy all the evidence. You just have to create a better, more powerful, more seductive story. You omit the shocking closeness of the first vote. You erase the brutal, inconvenient symptoms of the poison. You transform a terrifying, messy death by state-sanctioned suffocation into a noble, philosophical ideal. You create a narrative so beautiful and so profound that no one would ever want to look for the ugly reality underneath. This is a story about the profound fragility of truth. It proves that a verifiable fact, a prison cell, a clay file, the toxicological profile of a poison can be completely erased from the public memory by a compelling enough lie. It demonstrates that history is not a record of what happened. It is a story that is told, a narrative that is shaped, controlled, and weaponized. And the tools are always the same: selective omission, emotional manipulation, and the creation of a martyr. The story of Socrates proves that the most effective way to control the future is to rewrite the past. The question we must ask ourselves is, whose lies are we living today?